Hello, Dominic here from the Bournemouth Writing Festival. Welcome again to another one of our YouTube videos introducing some of our speakers and supporters in the run-up to the Writing Festival. Now, yesterday I was in the town centre with Amy Brown from the Winchester Poetry Festival because she is going to be curating and creating the poetry hub that we're going to be having in the Avenue, and we were scouting locations and coming up with some fantastic ideas. Now, the poetry hub's going to be on the ground floor of the Avenue shopping centre at the back, and she's got a lovely lineup of workshops and activities which you can come along to, drop in. They're completely free, they're family friendly, and it's just a chance for anybody really to come along and try out some poetry, have a chat with a poetry expert, a poetry professional, and get writing poetry basically. Now, the Poetry Hub is right outside the AUB Art Gallery, which is where our talks are going to be. And we've got on the Saturday, some of the talks are going to be specifically about poetry. So if you are into poetry, and I know there's a huge poetry community in Bournemouth, please come along to the Avenue on Saturday to take part in that. Now, today I'm delighted to welcome Gary Dalkin and Sophie Beal, who are huge supporters of the Writing Festival. They have a talk on Saturday at 2 p.m. called Organising Chaos, Turning Your Messy Draft into a Publishable Novel. And I'm sure lots of writers out there are going to resonate with this. So Sophie Beal is a Bournemouth-based writer and co-director of Cadence Publishing, which is an independent publishing house based here in Bournemouth. So hello, Sophie.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Great to have you. And Gary Dalkin is an editor who helps writers polish their manuscripts, including structural editing, copy editing, and proofreading, as well as academic proofreading for all you students and scholars out there. So check out his website, tothelastword.com, for all of his editing services. But he also writes for Writing magazine, and I saw this week that he put on his Facebook page that he has contributed to 300 consecutive editions of Writing magazines, which is phenomenal. So hello, Gary.
Hello, Dominic, and really pleased to be here.
Great to see you. Okay, so Sophie, let's start with you. So you're a writer, but you've also decided to start up a publishing house. So why don't you tell us a little bit why you did that?
Well, it came out of the original inspiration came out of COVID, when my co-founder and I were thinking about publishing our own work, and we'd both come very close to being published traditionally, but then COVID hit, and I remember I think COVID hit, and we had a very depressed, sitting on her tiny balcony with her four children in the room next door, watching telly, knowing that we weren't going to get published like we'd hoped we would because of COVID. And so we started thinking about the market, and we actually originally were thinking about publishing ourselves, but we thought, no, the trouble is that you want to be validated. You want what you do, if you're going to self-publish, you want it to be as good as traditionally published work. You don't want anyone looking down their nose and dismissing it, and we want it to be taken seriously. But within a week, the vision had changed, really, because we discovered what can be done these days with technology, and realized that we could publish not just ours, we hoped. I still haven't done mine, but not just ours, but other people's, who were like us and didn't fit easily into the market, but on the other hand had done a lot of research and had really worked on their craft, and basically had basically had books that people would want to read. So yes, so that's where I come from.
So before I move on to Gary, then tell us a little bit about some of the successes you've had with your publishing company, and maybe a little hint of what's to come.
Right. Well, we've been delighted. The first novel we published, which was last year was a young adult novel called Sold, about a girl who's sold into slavery, but she thinks she's coming she's coming to the UK for a better life, but she's actually enslaved by a couple, the couple that are supposed to be looking after her. And we worked, I think we thought we were publishing this about 2 years ago, but it was actually only last year. But it's been mentioned in The Guardian, and very favourably. It was editor's pick for young adult fiction in the summer edition of the School Librarian, and I can now, hopefully by the time this gets released, we will be on the Read for Empathy list, which is very exciting. Read for Empathy, the charity choose 65 titles across all ages to help boost children's empathy in all sorts of ways. In the wider, it's not as political as it sounds, and we're going to be on it alongside people for big name writers like Neil Gaiman and with publishers like Macmillan and Usborne, and that's very exciting because it is only our first book. And when we started off, we didn't actually know. We only had a gut feeling that we knew what we were doing. So that's very exciting.
Well, brilliant, and many congratulations to you. So Gary, you've had a very long and distinguished career editing and writing, as we mentioned. So tell us a little bit about kind of what your career in editing, but also, maybe for some of the people watching this, what are the common mistakes or commonalities that you see day in, day out when editing?
Okay, well, a very brief version is 30 years ago, I got asked to co-feature edit a magazine, which was the Journal of the British Science Fiction Association, mainly because nobody else wanted to do it. And I learnt my craft that way, and I worked in magazines and for various websites. Then about 15 years ago, people started asking me to look at their manuscripts. Every time I went to a party or a social gathering, someone would say, "I've written a book, would you have a look at it?" This was because they discovered that I'd been a judge of the Arthur C. Clarke Award. So they thought I knew something about writing. People kept asking me, and so eventually I thought, well, it's rather time consuming to do this for free. I thought, if people want me to do this, well, maybe then I can do this professionally. And this coincided with the first Kindles coming out, and there was overnight a boom in self-publishing. Some of the time that I've worked for professional publishers, but as it's gone on, mostly I've been working for people who are at the stage where they're either going to self-publish or they're looking to get their work as good as it can be before looking for an agent or submitting to a traditional publisher. And over the last 15 years or so, I've worked on dozens of books that have been published either traditionally or self-published, and helped a lot of other writers who haven't yet got to that stage, but worked on their manuscripts, and worked, as you say, for Writing Magazine during that time, various other projects. So that's a very short version of where I come from. Oh, and the second part of, the common problems. Well, every manuscript's different and every writer's different. And you could really say that every problem is that bit different because it's a combination of different things. But I guess if you really think of it, it's that people get too close to their own work to actually be able to see what is obvious to someone who's a bit more distant from it. And I think that probably really is the core of everything, is the problems may be different, and often they are very easy to spot if you're not involved in it and haven't been working on this thing for 2 or 3 or 5 years or however long it is. So you come along and read it, and I've always been one of these people who I would go to the cinema with some friends and they would love this film, and I think, yeah, but what about that? What about that? This didn't make any sense. They could have changed one line of dialogue and it would have all made perfect sense or whatever, or that character's behavior suddenly became inconsistent. And so basically, I think it's always just been the way my brain works, that I would take stories apart and put them back together. And I have one client I've worked with several times. He once sent me a card saying that he was embarrassed to say that I understood how his stories work better than he did. So yeah, that's just me. That's my brain, and what seems obvious to me maybe doesn't seem obvious to the person who wrote it, and so that's the one thing I'm good at, which is probably a good thing I am, because I'm not much good at anything else.
Well, I don't believe that for a second. But that leads us very nicely into your talk, which is called Organising Chaos, Turning Your Messy Drafts into a Publishable Novel. Now, I know a lot of writers are going to be all in the same boat here, particularly me, when I just write, get it out of my head and throw it onto a page. And yes, you're right. You know, once we finish that first draft, or, you know, then you reiterate. And you, as you said, Gary, you can get, sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees. So Sophie, to start with you, what are you going to be talking about in this session?
Well, by the end of it, we hope we'll give people confidence and practical ways to turn their messy draft into a publishable novel. So like Gary says, we're going to show people ways of getting distance from their novel so that they can start seeing it as a reader or an editor would, rather than the person from whose head it was created. We're going to be talking about finding the backbone, the bones of the story in the sort of like what might usually feels like a gelatinous mess, so that once you've found those, you can start hanging bits of muscle and and tendon on. So like getting the big bits right first before you move to the prose. So ways of thinking about structure and characters and plot. And keeping sane as well. So planning your drafts. I'm a great believer in lots of fast drafts, so that you don't get bogged down in all the details. Fast drafts looking for individual problems. Yes, and so yes, and I think from my bit will probably be a lot about problem solving. So when you're on your own because I'm the one who's sat on my own in my own mess. That's my I know a lot about free writing and the benefits of talking things over with a friend and doing exercises, and yes, so things like that.
So Sophie, whilst you're kind of looking at the problem solving, Gary, I'm guessing you're going to be delving into some of the more details, and maybe it's even cutting stuff out. There's that phrase that a lot of people use, cue your darling. So yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about, what you're going to be discussing in this talk?
Well, we haven't really worked out exactly how we're going to divide everything up, or even quite how we're going to do this, because we just haven't sat down and figured that out quite yet. But we'll be talking also about self-organization, on the principle that if you can't get yourself organized, you can't organize anything else. So just part of it is the mentality of realizing that you've got your first draft done, but you're nowhere near. We can almost quote Churchill that it's not the beginning of the end, but it might be the end of the beginning. And you've got a long way to go. Sophie came up with a phrase about writing for the long haul. And I think a lot of writers, they get that first draft done, they get very excited, then they get bogged down and they give up, they get stuck. But it's about realizing at that point that you're really just still near the beginning, and you've got to realize you've got a lot of problems to go, you've got a lot to work through, enormous amount to do, and you might be chipping away at this thing for a long time to come. And you've got to get into that mindset first. So I think the first thing is about getting that way of thinking that writing a novel is more like doing several marathons. It's not doing one sprint. It's maybe doing a marathon every day for the next 2 years or whatever. So partly getting yourself organized mentally, and then getting practical organization in terms of how you write, setting aside time, working out when's the best time of the day to write. I mean, I do my best creative work between about 3 and 6 in the afternoon. Some people, it might be early in the morning or late at night. And maybe we're talking about how you have to rearrange your life even, so that you're working like half an hour when your brain is firing on all cylinders can be better than 2 hours when you're tired and uninspired. So there's all these sort of things about organization. We can, even if we've time, we may well be looking at just experimenting with different methods of software that you can use. People get stuck in using the same software and never think to change, and you suddenly find a new piece of software that works more like your brain does. You think, well, this is fantastic. I gel with this. This works the way I think. So instead of fighting the software, just a change of what you're used to take your notes in can just really revitalize things. Or even a simple tip like Google Keep, smart little thing that you can have in your pocket on your phone. you suddenly think of a line of dialogue or a title for something, you can just talk to it, just tell it a note. It'll be waiting for you on your laptop when you come home. It's just there, you haven't lost it. So yeah, there's a million and one things that we can talk about just getting better organized. And I guess the other thing is eventually that point where you have to hand it over to someone else, and recognizing that you're going to have to bring in the beta readers, go take it to a writing group. That scary bit where you show it to other people, even hiring someone like me, a professional editor, and say, okay, someone else really needs to look at this now. So it's about recognizing points like that as well.
I mean, for me personally, when I wrote, the first draft was the most fun, because it's getting out, discovering where the characters are going, discovering where the plot's going. And then for me, it's quite daunting, the editing process. But you have to do, it's not, you don't do one process, one redraft, you do many, and I did probably close to 100, and it's read throughs my first one. So Sophie, what are the kind of takeaways that you're hoping people will leave with after your talk?
Yes, I think knowing that you're not a bad writer just because you need to edit is probably the biggest one. To realize that editing is something that almost everybody has to do. I don't know of anybody who can write a perfect first draft. That it's a normal part. That seeing that criticisms from other people, including editors and beta readers, are normal and helpful. And just getting some idea, just getting confidence, as I say, and getting some practical ideas about how to go about turning your messy draft into a publishable novel. So.
Great. And Gary, your website is called To the Last Word. So I'm going to give the last word to you on this little interview. So again, what are you hoping that people will hope to achieve once they've finished your talk?
Well, I think Sophie nailed it there, really. The confidence, the realization that no matter what you think of your book at the moment, when you've just finished that first draft, that it really is just an early step. And that if you're prepared to put in all the work and effort that you need to, and practice, that like a lot of things, a lot of writing is about just learning the craft, doing it and getting better and better and better. This idea of the sort of inspired genius who just sits there and churns out perfect manuscripts. There may be a few people like that, but they're few and far between. And for a lot of writers, it's like a lot of things. The more you do it, the better you get at it, the better you understand your own process of doing it and get better at ways of working, and you get more efficient at doing it. You get to recognize when you're doing something good and when it's getting better. And so, yeah, it's about just inspiring people with that confidence that if they're prepared to do it, if they really want to do it, then they can, really.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I think this is going to be a hugely popular talk. I think it's going to resonate to so many writers at all sorts of different stages of people's writing journey. So thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Gary, for coming along.
Thank you, Dominic.
So Gary and Sophie's talk, Organising Chaos, Turning Your Messy Draft into a Publishable Novel, is on Saturday, the 27th of April at 2 p.m. at the Pavilion Dance. So make sure you secure your spot. So thank you so much for joining me today, and see you in Bournemouth on the 26th, 27th and 28th of April this year. Take care. Bye-bye.